The Texas Longhorns stole the show at the NFL Draft Combine, and today on Locked On Longhorns, we have Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus to tell you all about it.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathon Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns with Pro Football Focus is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Once again, on today's episode, Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus. And I'm assuming you're back home now after a lengthy, very adventurous weekend in Indy. For you, how many NFL draft combines is this now that you've covered?
So this was number 7 for me. Would have been number 8, but I think I missed the one that was either the COVID year or right after the COVID year, whichever one that kind of got messed up a little bit there. But 7 for me, which is pretty crazy as somebody who, like many out there, grew up watching the combine, loving the NFL draft. To actually be there every year, it's always pretty surreal. So yeah, this is number 7 for me.
And out of the 7, how did this one compare to, I guess, the first 6 for you?
Man, they're always so much fun. You know, every time I get to go to Indianapolis, I learn how to do things a little bit better, right? I mean, when I was first there, I was covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a beat reporter. So a lot of the stuff was, okay, let's talk to or be around the podium or pay attention to a lot of guys that we think are going to be Buccaneer targets. And I did that for a handful of years. Then when I went to the combine via the draft network, it was more national. You know, I had a couple of players that I wanted to scout in particular. You got to hear a lot more from them, got to pay attention to things in a much grander scheme. And then PFF, kind of the same way, especially now, heading up a lot of their NFL draft content. It's fun. You just, that time of year, not only do I get to see these prospects for the first time, listen to them speak, get to watch the workouts and everything, but it's a great opportunity to talk to a lot of other people throughout the rest of the league, right? Hear what they are hearing, run into a lot of media friends, exchanging, you know, the scuttlebutt of the rumors and what's this team doing? What have you been hearing about this prospect? So a lot of that stuff is just so much fun. It's a lot of the same, but definitely evolves throughout the years.
Super cool. So if we're talking about the 2024 NFL Draft Combine, little did we know history would be made, and you were in the building. So I just want you to describe the atmosphere, because it sounded crazy on television, but describe the atmosphere in the building when Xavier Worthy runs a 4.25, and then you see him lining up to run again, right? And then he ultimately breaks the record, right? What was that about?
Yeah, so I was not in Lucas Oil Stadium for it. I was actually doing some other media stuff at the convention center where like Radio Row was happening and all that. But holy cow, wild. Like it just absolutely insane. And it is crazy to think that he ran a 4.25. And I think you could see it on the TV broadcast. Like all the players around him were like, take the shoes off. Like we're done. Like that's a wrap, like all that. And if he would have listened to those dudes, which I'm going to be honest, like you probably should have, right? I mean, like you run a 4.25, like don't risk, like pulling a hammy or a quad or something like that. Like get out of there, man. Take your money. You're basically right there. But he must have gotten close to or beaten the record during his training. He must have known like, okay, 4.25, I've done that before. I can go faster. And it is, I wonder how much of a ripple effect that's going to have with players who maybe, even if they're not like close to the record, like if let's say they run a 4.41, right? And that might be a really good time for them. If instead of saying, yeah, I'm going to stand on that 4.41, if they go, man, if I run a little bit faster on my second run, I got a chance to tell people I ran 4.3s for the rest of my life, and they got to believe me because I did it at the combine. Like, I wonder how many people are now going to look at Xavier Worthy's second attempt as the record-breaking attempt and say to themselves, yeah, I can go a little bit faster. Yeah, I can give it another run. So I think that we might see a little bit of a trend here because he was able to break that on the second run, which it just never happens, right? It never happens. You never run faster on your second run than you did on your first run, but you could tell when he lined up for that second one. I mean, you could tell within the first 10 yards that he had a chance to do something special because he exploded out of his stance and he was immediately gliding up the top speed, and just incredibly impressive from him, man. What a performance. And it was so cool, obviously, to see him get to see the number live on the screen and then keep sprinting all the way to the end zone. And I just, that's the fun stuff about the combine, man. You really do love to see it.
Yeah, it was super cool for Xavier Worthy. And I think coming into the process, I had him, as a second round pick, and he's super talented, super productive, but there's just so many good receivers amongst, other good players in this draft. And I think most scouts and, NFL experts, all right, had him as a second round pick. But, after that combine performance, I don't see how you could take 32 players ahead of arguably the fastest player in the National Football League. So 4.2, 140. The production to match, 26 touchdowns over 3 seasons, what he's put on tape at the University of Texas. Xavier Worthy had to run himself in the first round at the NFL Combine. Do you agree?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that he was somewhere between like a second and third round pick for teams. There were going to be teams that more prioritized the speed, who just would have felt like, man, you can't teach what he has. So probably something a little bit closer to the back end of the first round, early part of the second round. But there are also parts of his tape. I mean, let's be honest. He's 165 pounds, right? I mean, he's a skinny dude, and that lack of strength, that lack of mass and density does show up on his film, right? I mean, when it comes to contested catches and getting off blocks and, getting off press coverage, all that kinds of stuff, he's got the speed to be able to do it. But when it comes to those power parts of his game, he struggled in those areas. And he's still, I think, a better route runner than a lot of speed guys normally are. So you want to give him that credit. I think he's got better releases as well. And of course, he does have the fastest 40 time of all time. But there are teams that are going to look at him and say, man, we don't really want to deal with that weight. That's just 165. You can't play at the NFL level at that kind of a weight. However, we are seeing guys like Jordan Addison, guys like Tank Dell, even guys like Garrett Wilson, who are a little bit smaller, right? Like these guys who can really succeed at these smaller weight profiles. And so maybe, back in the day, it would have been a bigger of a weight or an anchor to his scouting profile and how high he could go in the draft. But in today's day and age, it's all about speed. I mean, you see that from basically every team. They all talk about wanting to get faster. So I didn't think so before last week, but now I would agree with you. I think Xavier Worthy is going to be a lock to go in the first round somewhere.
Yeah, and out of all the players you mentioned, I think a player that Sark coached is going to help put some money in Xavier Worthy's pocket. Devontae Smith, right? He won the Heisman at 165 pounds. He's been really good for the Eagles at 165 pounds in the National Football League. Also, I just want to say really quickly, I'm hearing so much lazy analysis, right? So many people are telling me Xavier Worthy would be a perfect fit on the Chiefs. He runs a 4.21. He'd be a perfect fit for all NFL teams, right? All 32 of them, right? So stop putting him on the Chiefs. He'd be a perfect fit wherever he goes. Right?
I mean, he would be a perfect fit on the Chiefs. He would be a perfect fit on the Chiefs. I mean,
the other 31 teams for sure. Like every team can use a player that runs a 4.21.
Yes.
So
you're right.
Speaking of receivers at the University of Texas, Adonai Mitchell, I think with his tape, there are times where there could be some inconsistencies, and there's some times where maybe you thought he could have dominated more than he did, right, with his skill set. But for the most part, his tape screams at you, first rounder. But like I said, there's so many good, first round wide receivers as well as other players that naturally he could just get pushed to the second round. That was my thought process before he ran a 4.34, right? And so similar to Xavier Worthy, it's like if you got Adonai Mitchell with first round tape that's screaming at you, plus a 4.3, 4.40, is Adonai Mitchell now in that first round conversation squarely as well?
Yeah, so I've been big on AD Mitchell basically since this summer. We go through summer scouting and we give out, the early rankings, normally the top 5s or top 10s for receivers going into the season. And Mitchell was very clearly in one of my top receiver groups. I can't remember if he was exactly top 5. If I remember correctly, he was wide receiver 4 going into the season behind Marvin Harrison Jr., behind Malik Neighbors, and behind Rome Odunze. I think he was that next guy for me. He is. He's just so talented. I think he's a top 20 pick talent-wise. There are just times because he does it all. He's a big, tall receiver. He's got way more wiggle than you would think for a player of his size. He's got a variety of different releases that he could show you at the line of scrimmage to get off press. I think he's a good route runner. He's a nuanced route runner despite his size. He could be a good contested catch receiver. He's good vertically up the sideline. Doesn't give you a ton of yards after catch, but that's just kind of not his game, right? He doesn't go into it thinking that he's going to be a big yak guy, so you just don't see it a lot from him in his style. But in terms of what he brings to the table, I think he's a T. Higgins type of a player, and not necessarily like T. Higgins, the early second round pick kind of a guy when he was coming out of school. I mean, the T. Higgins version that we see now, like somebody who is getting high wide receiver money, you know, that's going to garner a ton of draft capital in a trade if the Bengals end up moving on from him. And so I think that AD Mitchell is a top 20 talent. The thing that bugs me with him is that you're right. When it comes to those inconsistencies, it's almost just as if when he is playing super focused and know the ball is about to come his way, he feels uncoverable. But then there are other times when if he's not the primary read on a play, or he just knows that the ball is not coming to him, he just doesn't have that same sort of fire. And I think that teams are going to notice that. And that might be why we've heard less hype about him and him more, you know, comfortably in the second round. I think the tape and the talent when he is on is top 20 worthy, but we'll just see how the NFL kind of views some of that up and down. Do they question his competitiveness? You know, I'm not going to sit here and do that myself. I've never met him. You know, I've never coached him, so I can't do that in all fairness. But there are definitely times where he looks like he is uncoverable. And then there are other times where you go, man, I know you got it in you. I wish I would have seen it on that play. I felt like that would have resulted in a big play. So how much teams emphasize a little bit of a hot and cold with him, that will determine whether he ends up being a mid to late first round pick or maybe still somebody who goes in the second round.
Yeah, I think sometimes great players get bored, you know, and I think that's the thing with Adonai Mitchell. Sometimes great players get bored, but like you said, when he's focused, he's dominant, he's uncoverable, and, you know, hopefully somebody in the first round will see that. A quick word from FanDuel, and then I'm going to ask Trevor Sikkema about 2 All-American defensive tackles and how they performed and what NFL scouts are saying about these 2 players going into the draft. Today's episode, once again, Locked On Longhorns Pro Football Focus, brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the National Basketball Association. So, Trevor, we're talking about Byron Murphy now, and his official measurements at the combine came in at 6 foot, 297 pounds, right? And I'm 30 years old. When I was growing up, that was undersized for a defensive tackle. You might have lost money in the NFL draft if you came in at 6 foot, 297 pounds as a defensive tackle. But for some reason, and you know the reason, I'm about to ask you for it, but for some reason, Byron Murphy is still widely considered as the best defensive tackle prospect in this class and seems like a lock to go first round. What is it about Byron Murphy's tape? What is it about Byron Murphy's game that even coming in at 6 foot, 297 pounds, the NFL views him as a potential difference maker at the next level?
Well, the NFL is, like you kind of referenced there, a little bit lighter nowadays than it was, you know, close to, 2000. You normally have defensive tackles anywhere from, 320 to 350 in the early 2000s, maybe even a little bit bigger for some cases. And I think that the offensive trenches reflected that as well. You got a lot of guys who are close to around 330, especially when it came to those interior players. And it's just a faster game now. It's a more spread out game. You've got a lot more zone blocking concepts and getting offensive linemen out on the move. Got a lot more pullers, a lot more creativity within the trenches, and you got to get athletes there. Well, normally when you have athletes, they're coming at a little bit lighter of a weight profile. So for Murphy himself, having his weight be right below 300, now I think he could play a little bit more. I think he could play probably at like 305. That might be a comfortable spot for him at the NFL level. That's not the kiss of death anymore. That's not a incredibly undersized defensive lineman. And instead, you see a player who pound for pound is unbelievably strong, right? I think that he can really burst off the line of scrimmage. You saw that with his 4.87 40-yard dash, really good 10-yard split, explosive in both the vertical and the broad jump. Those things showed up at the combine. And you see that because when he's in a 3-point stance, and especially when he's in a 3 technique, you're telling him to just get up the field. Boy, can he do it well. He can attack either shoulder. He can shoot those gaps. He can get into the backfield. He's so strong when he can actually attack the half man. Nobody can really handle him. I think we saw that this past year. But then when it comes to double teams as well, right? Because if you're in one of those interior defensive line spots, whether it's a 0 tech, a shade 1, 3 technique, even like a 4-eye, you have the potential to be double teamed quite a bit. And duo concepts and just, emphasis of where the running strength is going. Byron Murphy is somebody who, whether it's via a corkscrew technique when he's getting his knee down and just trying to hold the line of scrimmage, or just getting both arms up there and just trying to handle these guys the best he can, he plays with leverage. He plays with a ton of strength. And so for me, yeah, that weight profile is a little bit lower, but I emphasize in my scouting profile with him, this dude's strong as an ox. I'm not really worried about him when it comes to really getting blown off the ball with double teams. Now, is it going to happen at the NFL level? Yeah, because these interior offensive linemen are freaks and they're strong as well. But on a play-by-play basis, I expect this guy to hold up really, really well in the run game, hold that line of scrimmage, and then when it comes to the pass game, that's where he really shines. He can get into the backfield with that sub 300 weight and that explosiveness. So Byron Murphy is somebody who I've got him and Johnny Newton from Illinois right there is 1 and 2 when it comes to interior defensive linemen, one in this class. I think both of them are top 15 guys, top 12 guys, and so they're close, but they're both really talented for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, speaking of Byron Murphy's All-American counterpart in T'Vondre Sweat, I feel like T'Vondre Sweat has quickly become one of the most polarizing prospects in the draft, because if you look at the history of players that size, they just don't have a lot of production in the NFL at that level. 366 pounds. I know that's been a concern for T'Vondre Sweat. Didn't weigh in at the Senior Bowl, but did weigh in at 366. Also the motor, but he did answer a lot of those concerns this year. Playing at Texas, right? And so there's some people that just say turn on the tape and you can obviously see T'Vondre Sweat is a freak and that should translate to the next level. There's some people that say he's 366 pounds, he's a 2-down player, don't see a lot of pass rush potential, not sure of the impact he'll have at the next level. I'm biased. I watched every snap he took in his career. I watched him this year at Texas. I think he's going to be a freak at the next level. Where are you on T'Vondre Sweat? Because like I said, at this point, it's become really polarizing with the analysis on him.
Yeah, so Sweat, really, it just simply comes down to, do you trust the conditioning with him? Because he's 365 pounds and he ran a 5.27, which is just absolutely insane. I mean, the dude's get off is nuts. His punch at contact is crazy. Obviously, the size speaks for itself when it comes to going up against double teams and just handling single blocks, being able to disengage and throw guys aside. He plays with more speed than you'd think for a guy who's 365 pounds. It just comes down to, okay, during this draft process, it is, I don't want to say easy, but it is your entire job to keep yourself in shape, right? He had the Senior Bowl in which he didn't really weigh into the Senior Bowl, which, look, that raised some eyebrows. And I'm going to be honest, like, it should have. Jim Nagy is the director of the Senior Bowl. Jim Nagy does not let you show up to that event if you are not willing to do everything. And that means measure in, get the height and weight, get the arm length, get the weight. And then also you got to practice. Now, of course, like some guys who go there for a couple of days and they don't practice that third day or they don't play in the game. I know that bugs him too, but that's something that kind of happens. But when it comes to showing up to the event, that's kind of a non-negotiable. He normally doesn't even let guys come to the event if them or their agents or whoever it is saying like, yeah, we want to come to the event, but we don't want to measure in. He's normally like, no, I'm not going to let you do it. So the fact that Sweat did not weigh in, one, it told me that he's a really talented football player and Jim really wanted to get him to Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. And two, I probably told you that his weight was a little bit of an issue there because he's listed at Texas's site at 362, right? How much bigger did you have to be from 362 to demand that you don't weigh into the Senior Bowl? So all of a sudden now we're worried, okay, you in the 380s? Are you in the 390s? Are you over 4 bills? Like, what's going on now? So the fact that he shows up at the combine, he's in the 360s, that was really good for him. I think that was really good for him and at least showed teams that when he wants to, he can keep his weight in check because he's a really talented football player. Obviously, he had a great year this past year, graded really well in our system. It's just a matter of, would he ever let his weight get to a point where his conditioning hurt him to where he is only that 2-down player? You do have to rotate him in and out quite a bit and if that's the case, sure, teams are still going to like you, but if you can't play all 3 downs and if your conditioning is going to be an issue, coaches don't really like that a ton. So that's the conversation around him. I think ultimately, even with all of those questions, going to end up being a 2nd-round pick by some team just because he's too talented to get out of that 2nd round.
Yeah, I agree. And I think whoever takes him, regardless of where they take him, he'll be a steal. A quick word from Nissan, and then we wrap up with Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little bit further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, and the Nissan Armada. If you're going for the Rogue, it's perfect for city drivers and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. With the Pathfinder, it has room up to 8. An expensive cargo capacity in advance, available 4x4 capability, and the Nissan Armada will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and go find your next big adventure and shop NissanUSA.com. All right, got about 5-6 minutes left with Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus. I want to ask you about Jatavion Sanders, right? Because coming in, Texas fans, of course, are going to say that, he's the second tight end behind Brock Bowers. Some of us have said he might even be better than Brock Bowers, but he ran a 4.74 and a 4.69 at the combine. And the appeal of Jatavion Sanders is that he's a move tight end, right? Somebody that you can put out wide. He could be a mismatch problem because of his athleticism. Did a 4.74 and a 4.69 40 at the combine. Did that hurt Jatavion Sanders, or do you think that he was able to overcome those 240 times?
It's slower than I thought it was going to be. I thought that he was going to be a 4.5s guy, and he was not really close. Like, he wasn't even a low 6s guy. So I'm not going to lie, I was surprised by that. I've watched in his tape. Like, I think he's more explosive than that. I don't know if he just didn't have a good training session. If it just wanted a good day, because that's the thing too. Like, some of these guys show up to run, and it's just like it's not their day. And when I watch him, he very, very clearly was tight end 2 for me in this class. Just the way that, and it wasn't even necessarily the straight line explosiveness. I got a lot of guys that can be straight line explosive, like Theo Johnson from Penn State, straight line explosive. Dalen Holker is the same way from Colorado State. Ben Sinnott from Kansas State. Like, I got a lot of guys who can run straight, run the vertical route, stretch the field, get a vertical offense up the middle of the field. What impressed me the most about Sanders is he's whatever. What are you weighing at? 6'4", 6'5", something like that,
245,
right?
Yeah, 6'4", 245.
There you go. So, and 245 pounds, and he's like stopping on a dime and changing direction really well for a guy who's 245. It's like, whoa, okay. Now all of a sudden the route tree is completely diversified for this guy, and you can do a lot of different things with him. You can play him in line, you can play him in the slot, you can play him outside. So I still really like the tape from him. I was a little disappointed in that 40-yard dash, but it's not like I'm totally soured on this dude. I still think he should be tight end 2 in this class.
All right, real quick answer on this one, because I got a thought-provoking question after this one. I know we're running out of time. Jonathon Brooks, the best ability is availability. He's obviously not available right now. Is he still running back 1 for you?
No question about it. We see guys come back from those ACL injuries. I'd love for him to go to a situation. The Packers is the situation that continually comes up for me, where you draft him, he plays behind Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones gets to be RB1 this year. You get to just gradually work Jonathon Brooks in as he gets more healthy. And then I think Aaron Jones' contract is either up next offseason, or it gets, they can move on from him. Then you could just give Jonathon Brooks a show. He's still young, doesn't have a ton of mileage on him, but even what we saw this past year, the catching ability, the pass blocking ability, the vision, the ability to make guys miss, the home run speed, like, it's all there for Jonathon Brooks. He is, without question, even with the injury, RB1 for me.
Right. And A.J. Dillon is a free agent, so he could step right in as running back 2 with the Green Bay Packers. All right, my question for you, I just came up with this off the top of my head because you're just giving such good insight. What does Quinn Ewers need to prove this season to be the first quarterback taken off the board in the 2025 NFL Draft?
Yeah, just a lot more consistency, especially when it comes to the deep ball. Like, we know this dude's got a hell of an arm. I remember seeing him at a quarterback camp when he was still in high school. So before he went to Ohio State, and he was throwing with other guys who were juniors and seniors in high school. And he looked like he had an NFL arm with these kids that were in high school. And I was like, this dude's unbelievable. So he has a phenomenal arm, but I think, you watch that Alabama game specifically, and he hits on a lot of those deep passes, and they win the game because of it, right? They go into Tuscaloosa, they get the big win. But that just was not consistent with him. I think that he's getting better in some of the little things when it comes to playing under pressure, some of those shorter throws, but still, the reason why you would draft Quinn Ewers and the reason why you would draft him QB1 in the draft is because of what he could do, pushing the ball down the field, zipping it to the sidelines, attacking over the middle. And it just, when it came to those passes were 30, 40, 50 yards down the field that that he boasts as a calling card, it just wasn't as consistent as it needed to be when it came to that ball placement and just the touch that he puts on passes. We know this guy can zip it in there, but more consistency with touch, I think, would probably be the biggest area that could allow him to have a major leap into that conversation to be the first quarterback off the board next year. So that's ultimately why I don't think he's in this draft class, because he realized, like, I can do better, I can be more consistent, and I can get drafted higher if I have another good year next year.
Amazing analysis, Pro Football Focus. Trevor Sikkema today, Tampa Bay Trey on Twitter. Let them know where else they can find you and get more of your content in the future.
Everything over at pff.com. I mean, right now we've got the first version of the 2024 NFL Draft Guide out right now. It's got the scouting summaries, the traits, the strength and weaknesses, the player comps. It'll have the combine numbers in there as well. And then we're going to evolve it to 200 guys, 250, and see how many guys that we can get in by the time draft season rolls around. So you can go check that out if you got a subscription over at pff.com.
Yes, sir. Forever grateful for your time and analysis today. Hook 'em. Peace.